welcome to the Visionary Collective. Today we're going to talk about 2020 and the impact it's had on mental health, which has been pretty intense. You know, personally, I believe our mental health has the single most profound impact on the quality of our lives. And yet I need to ask the question, why are we shamed into silence when it needs to be addressed? I mean, this really has to end, and this is something our society needs to address as well. You know, here at the Visionary Collective, we've been experiencing our own ups and downs since the pandemic hit. You know, we've been talking to friends and family and colleagues about how they're doing. And one thing that's really clear is people are still feeling isolated and unsettled and anxious and scared. You know, their mental state is in a place that has been hard to navigate, and they're really starved for help and direction. But again, they'll still stop and they're silent out of fear of the stigma associated with asking for help. And this isn't good. So it brings us to today in this conversation about mental health. You know, I think we can all agree that this is a time where we have a convergence of many intense challenges. We have the pandemic and loss of loved ones, the divisive narrative permeating the media, the stress and loss of jobs. People have lost jobs, they don't have income. And then throw on top of it, you have the holiday season. You know, it's not easy. So our hope is to destigmatize the conversations around mental health and share ways we can help ourselves and others. We want to get through the challenges and to start off 2021 on a positive note. And that is what we really hope to do today. So the good news is we have a powerful and influential group of people here with us today who share a passion about being open and honest about their own mental health struggles, and the work they're doing to build supportive communities for people who want to connect to others. And connection is so important. So without further ado, let me introduce the panel. Our first guest is Brittany Snow. Brittany is an accomplished actress who has starred in a series of blockbuster movies, including the Pitch Perfect franchise, which again, I think is hysterical, and you ladies sing pretty well too. Very good. Brittany has been honest about her own mental health and has been a passionate advocate for others for decades. She recently co-founded September Letters, a virtual community focused on letter writing and starting conversations around mental illness that hope to connect, inspire, and encourage us. So again, welcome and thank you for joining us, Brittany. It's really an honor. Our next panelist is coming in from Australia, Mitch Wallace. Welcome, Mitch. So Mitch has a master's degree in psychology from Columbia, and he's a leader in the mental health space for the millennial generation. Mitch started a mission called Heart on My Sleeve. I love that name. It's a global mental health social movement that empowers people to be real about how they feel, whether it's the good, the bad, or the inspirational. His mission is to remove the barriers to emotional healing, which are often shame and guilt and being silenced. He runs a weekly podcast called Understood. So thanks for joining us today, Mitch. And our final guest is Stephen Kite. Stephen is the Chief Operating Officer of NAMI California. NAMI stands for the National Alliance on Mental Illness. It's the largest grassroots mental health organization dedicated to building better lives for the millions of Americans affected by mental illness. And I'm Kristen Hurd. I'm the founder of the Visionary Collective, and I will be hosting this panel. So again, welcome to all three of you. And to our audience, thank you so much for joining us today and taking the time to participate in this conversation as well. So just a little bit about the format. We're going to do the panel, and then for the audience, there will be a live Q&A, and we encourage everyone to put in questions that, you know, that they're interested in submitting. So I'm going to start right with the questions. I'm going to jump in. This is a question for all of you. Brittany, I'm going to put you on the stage first. Okay. So tell me, you know, what's 2020 been like for you? And for all of you, when you answer this question, what's 2020 been like for you? And what have you seen, different challenges maybe with your friends and family? Like when you reflect back on it, what do you think of?
I actually was answering this question the other day, and I for the first time tried to explain it in a way that made sense to me. But I think that I've had all of these glaringly apparent problems that were underneath the surface in some way or another, or I handled them in a way that I felt was doable. And then 2020 kind of put them in neon lights and said, this is something that the universe wants you to look at, and I'm illuminating it for you because there's no other distractions. There's no other where that you can hide or get busy or try to pivot in another way. You really have to look at these things. And I think that to look at it from a positive angle, maybe that was the way that it's supposed to happen like this, is that this is a reset for a lot of people, and it's really painful, but it is forcing us to look at things that we probably needed to look at in some way or another. And what I've been trying to do is really focus on my part in those problems, and then also letting go a lot of the things that I can't control. Not only about those problems, but about the universe and the world right now in general. And I think that balance has been really tricky, but it's been also really gratifying and rewarding.
Yeah, well, that's interesting you say it's a spotlight. It really highlighted the things that, we're so used to running nonstop as a society, and everyone was forced to just stop and sit with the things maybe they didn't want to look at. That's a great way to look at it. How about you, Stephen? What about you?
I think this year has just been so challenging on so many fronts. I think for a lot of folks in the nonprofit world, that's typically something that we do in person now happens virtually. So for a lot of our local affiliates across the state and across the nation who are used to welcoming folks in to kind of give them a hug and have classes and learn about mental illness, I think now we're learning to do that through Zoom, right? Like all of us are now TV producers of our own kind of video lives, and yeah. And so I think adjusting to that has been challenging because it is, I think, harder to form connections and connect with each other virtually. It can be than in person. And so learning to make that jump has been hard, I think, but the need has increased so much. I was reading today that calls into telehealth lines have gone up 3,000% just since the beginning of the pandemic. And with many of those being folks who are looking for help around mental illness. And so, isolation tends to increase those needs. And so we're trying our best to sort of address that together. So it's been very challenging, but also so rewarding. Things like this would have taken, us traveling and all kind of coming together, and now we can reach folks all over. So just as many challenges, I feel like there's also so many success stories and so many exciting things like this that help people,
Right. It's finding that silver lining.
Yeah.
Making it work. Right. And how about you, Mitch?
Thank you again so much for having me. I'm so stoked to be here. I love this, and hello to everyone. For me, to pick up on Brittany's point, I started getting really obsessed with the science of something like a pandemic, and the neuroscience and the psychology shows that there's no bigger threat to the brain than uncertainty. In fact, the brain would prefer physical pain and mental pain over feeling uncertain. That's why we see people trapped in careers for decades that they don't like, because at least it's certain. That's why we see people worrying themselves to the point where they have no quality of life, because they would desire certainty over the present quality of life of potentially letting that worry go. And in a time where there's never been so much uncertainty, that's why mental health has kind of exploded, because everyone's trying to find, what can I hold on to make sense of the world? And for me, it just so happened that serendipitously, I don't think it was because of COVID, but around the time of March when it started to ramp up, I turned 30. And I also have been 3 years in this mental health space, previously in the corporate space. And I think that my body had got to a point, this spotlight point, where everything came to rest, and I then broke. I've broken several times in my life, not least of which 5 years ago, the biggest. And this kind of was akin to that breakdown. And I think it was because there were so many things I was hiding from and busying myself in work, that even the work that I thought I'd done on myself started to poke its head out again. So it's an amplification, but as an introvert, I've actually settled into this new reality quite well now that it's become kind of a custom. And I do like the sense of empowering rest that it gives.
Right. Yeah, no, that's actually a really great point. It's, the highlighting again, the spotlight of what is, I love what you said, the things you thought you took care of. It's like that whole idea of peeling the onion. If somebody tells me you have to peel another layer of that onion to find another thing, I swear to God, I'm like, really? I'm almost 50 and I have to learn something else. But, it's times like these that really test us. So, thanks for sharing all of that. So, Mitch, I am going to go back to you. Can you tell me a little bit of the story that led up to your career? And, you know, and yeah, how did you come up with Heart on My Sleeve? Tell me.
I'll give you the short version because I could go for hours.
Okay, I'll keep
essentially,
it, and don't worry, I'll keep
me honest. Keep me honest. Do this. Go like this. Actually.
All right, got it. All right.
I knew that I was different at 7 years old when my mum saw me repetitively touching the dashboard of her car, blinking over and over, saying the word God. And she looked at me and said, "What are you doing?" I still remember the grocery store that we were outside of. And I said, "I don't know, but I always feel upset. And I think that I'm a bad person." And so we went to the doctor a few days later, and I was very quickly diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder and acute anxiety. I had no idea what that meant at the time. I just remember going out and looking up at my mum, who to this day is still my best friend, and just asking her, like, why is my brain broken? Mm. And it was kind of that day where I thought, I need to hide this from the world. This is not only is incredibly confusing for me and is causing me insurmountable pain, but I don't want anyone else to see this bad, horrible, ugly side. So I got very good at putting on this metaphorical mask and started living like this double life. Throughout my career, did well in school, did a Bachelor of Commerce at Sydney University, was the youngest intern at Microsoft, worked there in Australia for 5 years, got flown over to the States. I was then living in Seattle as a global product manager, business class, hosting parties with Vogue at Design Week, mixing with Hollywood elite, giving demos to them about our next products. Like, it was the dream life, a guy in his mid-20s in the big smoke.
It looked all good on the outside, right?
Yeah, very much so. But there was a parallel world behind that, which was that I never wanted to look at what was going on, because in my mind it petrified me. And so the mental illness grew into panic disorder, depersonalization, depression, and by my late teens, you know, somewhat of a suicidal ideation. But because the outside world was going so well, I was just thinking to myself, I'm going to ride this until the wheels fall off. And it was over in the US, which they did. That was a function of lots of work, living away from home, but more importantly, your mid-20s is just a time where stuff comes to the surface, because you have to start answering the question, who am I? And I broke completely to a point where I didn't even think was humanly possible. And I was literally like begging, I was asking God, I was like, please, like, I'll devote the rest of my life to helping people not go through what I've been through, if you can help me. And somewhat of a miracle happened. I don't know if it was a miracle or destiny or what, but a YouTube video has got me in front of this camera today talking to you guys. I don't know if it saved my life, but it completely pivoted my life. I was just browsing on my computer, and up came this guy who's no one famous, who was in his bedroom talking to his webcam, and decided to upload it. And I saw his story, and it was almost word for word identical to mine. And it was the first time in my life my greatest need was met. By the way, a need that I never even thought that I had, which was I just wanted someone to understand. I wanted one person to say, I get it. And what that did is show me that so much of suffering in life isn't necessarily the problem that you go through. It's the layers and layers that surround that. It's the guilt, the shame, the isolation, the confusion. And when we have a shared human experience, it's like the most powerful anti-inflammatory known to man. It might not fix your problem, but it does remove everything that's not serving you and gives you the space to actually go inward. And through that, I was empowered with this belief that we have to be real and feel in order to heal. His authenticity, his vulnerability, his realness allowed me to go inward to the part that I'd been denying the whole time, and then also bring that to other people and say, like, actually, here's all of me. And so that started what I would say the day one toward my healing. That wasn't necessarily the output, but it was the catalyst to build the scaffolding of which I would then go and do the work that I needed, the real work that I was avoiding. And I had one life's goal after that, to be Harris, this dude who I've never met or spoken to for one other person. So quit my job, moved back to Australia, went down to my local beach, got a video camera and told my story. And I said, this is going to shatter the illusion that I have all my shit together, but I don't care. And at the end, I drew a heart on my arm, which is now an enormous tattoo, told my story. Within a week, that video reached over 1 million people. Now, then it started a global movement where people all around the world started drawing and tattooing hearts on their arms. And in just over 3 years, we're now a social movement and a social enterprise working with very large companies on authenticity and cultural change. I do a lot of speaking, social media, and I devote my life to helping people realize that they can change their narrative by being real and authentic.
So, so I'm just hearing that it's the storytelling, really, the connecting through the storytelling really is what opened the door for you originally. Just
That's
having
the
something
anti-inflammatory.
to identify with, which you hear a lot. Not feeling alone is so important. It strikes me too that, it's amazing when it comes to any kind of mental illness. You were a child. If you had been diagnosed with something like cancer, the whole world would have been all over you to help you. But instead, you felt like you had to go back in, which is, what we need to overcome, right? If a child, you don't want a child to feel that way. So, and Brittany, September Letters, it's very similar in the storytelling. Can you tell me a little bit about what brought that about?
That's actually, Mitch, you just blew my mind, because if I'm about to tell the exact same story, but just in the US. So hold on for your hats, guys, because this is going to get boring, because I'm going to say the same thing. So yeah, my story is very, very similar in how I started September Letters. Because when I was a teenager, I was going through some mental illness difficulties, and I didn't even know what I had. I had no clue. I knew I was doing weird stuff with food and weird stuff with my head, and I was counting and things and thinking weird things. But I read an article in a magazine. It was like a fitness magazine, because of course I collected all of them. And there was a girl who shared her story in this fitness magazine, and how she had overcome it, and she was healthy and she had gotten better. And it was the first time that I heard my own story in terms of like what I thought about and how I viewed food in the world in somebody else's words. And so I ripped it out and I carried it around in my back pocket for months, just for like the hope or the connection that there was somebody else who had this thing that I didn't even know about. Cut to many years later, after getting recovery from that thing, what that article was about, I started a movement with the Jed Foundation called Love is Louder, where we actually put Love is Louder on our hand, not on our arm, but the same thing kind of. And I wrote an article for People magazine about how I had, what I thought at the time, like recovered from this thing, blah, blah, blah. I went to a coffee shop a couple weeks after the article was published, and a girl came up to me at the coffee shop, and she was holding my article in her back pocket. And she said, I've been carrying this around with the hope that this is going to get me through, because I didn't even know what I had. And that was kind of the first initial thought where I thought, I loved Love is Louder. I love what that represented and what we grew from that and the connections that we built. But I also wanted to do something around the storytelling aspect of recovery, and the fact that we are so united and connected by sharing our vulnerability and sharing our stories. I mean, that woman's story was the first beacon of hope for me, and I had done the same thing for someone else unknowingly. And I think it's a ongoing pay it forward thing that, whether you understand that or not, I think that's our job as humans to connect each other and to gain empathy for each other. So it's very similar. And so through September Letters, we write our stories anonymously or not. And it's a platform for people to share their experience and their hope moving forward.
Great. And it sounds like writing is a tool too for just being cathartic and getting your story out. Would you agree with that? Or
definitely. I mean, for me, the idea of journaling sometimes is really daunting for me. I sometimes feel like there were so many therapists that were like, journal, and I'm like, no, that sounds awful. Right. That sounds like the last thing I want to do. But what was therapeutic for me was just writing little thoughts that came to my head, gratitude lists, doodles, song lyrics. And so really September Letters is just a cathartic, therapeutic process of anything that you feel like you need to get through. And then also sharing things with other people in terms of requesting letters, asking for help. There's on the website places you can say, my dad is going through this illness. Is anybody in the community going through the same thing? Can you write me a letter? And it's been amazing to see how many people are willing to help. And that is therapeutic and cathartic as well.
Yeah. I actually looked on the site and read a bunch. I mean, it's really beautiful how people reach out to each other and support each other. It's a great space to do that. So Stephen, somebody who is more in the, I guess, in the formal area of being a therapeutic group of support psychology and psychologists. You hear these stories. I mean, tell me a little bit about why you got involved, and if you can even connect with these two about, connecting with other human beings. What are you guys seeing? I mean, you initially you kind of talked about, yes, this is good to kind of be more efficient, but the lack of connection that people have had. What are you seeing as an organization that you guys are doing, and why it's important to you?
Yeah, thanks. I think for me personally, I'm somebody who's lived with my own mental health challenges, and I'm a family member of someone that lives with a mental health challenge. And I think that experience it just brings you to a place that, like you heard, it's so lonely. It can feel so lonely. And, I think one of the things that we see in non-pandemic times is that about 1 in 5 of us each year will kind of have some kind of a challenge with our mental health or mental illness. But of those folks, only about 40% of people actually go and seek help. And part of the reason for that, we call the treatment gap, which is usually about 8 years for folks between when they first start feeling symptoms to when they actually reach out for help. Part of the reason for that is, I think the stigma in society and what we see normally, right? Because even now it's like so much harder, is when someone's on the street corner and they're grasps their chest, we sort of all instinctively know what to do, that this person's in crisis, right? We call 911. The doctors come and they answer the person's questions, and they are taken to a hospital where they can have their family visit, and everything is explained to them. Oftentimes in mental illness, it's sort of the opposite experience, right? We see somebody who's having a mental health crisis, we run from them, we don't run to them. They can sometimes be taken to a place that their questions aren't answered and their family's not allowed to come in. I think for a lot of us who live with a mental illness, one of the best things that we ever hear is other people's stories and being able to connect to each other about what we went through. Well, NAMI is that place for a lot of folks in their local communities. In the same way that Brittany was sharing about putting an ad out in the paper for help, NAMI actually was started through that. Families who were, originally long ago, mothers were blamed for their children's mental illness and told, don't talk to your child, you're actually creating this issue. And families came together and said, that's actually not right. We're one of the biggest supports for each other. So I think, we're seeing that same thing happen now. That's why we're in this fight, I think, together, all of us here and everybody that's listening, to try to kind of overcome that stigma and that challenge of trying to figure out how do we bring each other together and make it safe, and know that, all of us go through this. One of the doctors that we work with says nobody escapes mental illness in their family or for themselves. And so if we're all going through this, doesn't it just make sense that we should be able to talk about it? And I think it's folks like Mitch and Brittany who really are helping people do that in all the ways that needs to. So
yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I love that. So I'm just, even though I would wait to the end usually, I'm just going to throw this out there because I think, I know myself too. I've struggled with something. and I don't mind saying it either. I've been sober since I was 17. So, being someone in recovery and an addict, it has its own set of challenges, right? So being with others who understand you has changed my life. And Brittany, like you said, paying forward is so important. So, I just want to talk, somebody put something up here, which if you guys could speak to this or, she said, I would like to know if you can give some tips to avoid having anxiety attacks in the moments of this isolation. So Stephen, I'm going to go back to you on that only because your organization is it's built in a way, it involves families, but it's more formal in terms of having therapists, psychologists and everything. So,
I think for us, our biggest thing is to talk to your doctor. I think that for every single person, it's so individual. And as we've heard of everybody's story, I think that what works for one person may not work for another. And so one of the best things you can do is, if you're ready, is to reach out, talk to your doctor, see what works for you, see if you want to go pursue therapy. I mean, there are so many options, right? But the biggest thing, and I want to thank the person who asked the question, is to have the bravery to talk about, I'm having this challenge. Admitting that there's something that you need help with, it's the hardest thing to do, and it is the first step to finding a solution. So I think that's something that's so best worked out between someone and their actual physician, and it is a good step to talk to us here today. So
Okay, so, and now let's go the personal route. How do you guys personally deal with anxiety when you're feeling alone? I mean, I have thoughts, but I would love to hear you guys first, definitely.
Go, Britt.
Oh, okay.
Okay, Britt, go ahead.
Well, I can share what works for me. You know, so after I dealt with one facet of my lovely mental health, then that was, you know, seemingly wrapped up in a bow, and I'm like, oh, I'm recovered, yay. No, then the next challenge happened, where all the feelings and emotions that I was covering up with the ism, the anxiety happened, the depression happened, and all of the emotions came. And so then I had to really start looking at what my anxiety was. And so that was another 10 years of really looking at anxiety, and I still struggle with anxiety today. But I have what I call a toolbox, which is, you know, some, I guess, a logical way of doing things, and also metaphysical, also spiritual. And I kind of just go into this toolbox, and I know these are the things that work for me. I know that my brain really likes to tell a story. Like Mitch said, you know, I think that our brains really like to feel safe. And so by doing that, you want to create a story, a narrative, to surround yourself with, this is what happened, this is what they thought about me, this is who that person is to me. And really, sometimes that isn't necessarily true. You could be making up a story in your mind just to make yourself feel connected and safe in this world that you want to create. But what I really like to do when I get anxious is to take away that story and to look at actually what I know 100% to be true, not something that happened in my past or something that I'm putting in the future, but like the actual like facts of the situation. And usually the facts are, I'm safe, I have a roof over my head, there's nothing wrong, you know, and just going back to like my breathing and knowing that, you know, it's moment by moment sometimes. And we love to make things up, but sometimes that's not the way.
Yes, we do. Yeah, right. Totally, yes. Mitch, you know, we talked a little bit before we got on this call, just talking about ahead of time. I'd love to hear what you think about handling anxiety. And I know we talked about like kind of doing the whys behind something. So like if you have meditation, why would you do it? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I would break it into reactive, proactive, and always. So reactive in the moment, I think the best thing with anxiety is come back. You're never going to solve anything while your amygdala is going bananas. So you have to come back into the body. The best way to do that is through breath. Breath has a scientific benefit when done right, where it'll basically hit the brakes. Your brakes are your parasympathetic nervous system. There's a misconception around breathing. So quick tip. A lot of people think that a deep breath is one of volume. That's not true. That's actually going to stimulate you. In an anti-anxiety breath that's deep is actually two things: location and pace. So the location of an anti-anxiety breath should be in the stomach. So you should physically feel your stomach balloon. If your stomach's not ballooning, it's not hitting the vagus nerve. So first thing about an anti-anxiety breath, get it deep into your stomach, location-wise. And the second thing is slow it down. The pace is key. You want to go probably, you know, anywhere between 3 to 7 counts in, hold at the top, 3 to 7 counts out, hold at the bottom. If you can make your out breath longer than your in breath, that's even better. So breathing is a good way to just come out of the moment so that you can come back into your rational brain and start to, as Brittany says, challenge things with healthy assumptions and more accurate points of view. That would be reactive. Proactive, I would look at, if you're a glass of water, and if your biology is permanently so primed that it's like 93 mils, the smallest thing is going to overflow you. So I think you need to create headroom in your glass for life to happen. So that involves daily things that enable you to bring your anatomy into a state of calm. meditation is a great way to do that. The Headspace app is amazing, but it could be having a hot shower, walking your dog. Where is it that you can go into flow, tap out of the brain and just be and exist, so that you can buy some head points, almost suspension. And then always, I would say that often anxiety is coming from a core belief system, often informed by a trauma, that has now manifested in a whole bunch of different ways because it's brilliant at adapting and defending you, that we need to go back into the seed and be like, is this still serving me? Is this still helpful? So with therapy, we're able to unpack what is this fear of having an argument with my boss at work is nothing to do with my boss. It's actually got heaps to do with that in my childhood, conflict meant a lack of love and abandonment and neglecting of my core safety needs. And I haven't even worked through that. So as an adult, that's now playing out in a range of ways. I can breathe all I want, but if I don't get to the core seed back here that's needing attention and processing, I'm just constantly band-aiding. So I think it's important to go back to your belief systems and try and restructure them to get the most macro tectonic shifts in your mental health.
Yeah, no. And so a little bit more about that. I mean, what would you recommend? Just therapy, or what have you seen as the most effective? Because I can definitely appreciate, I've seen that work. I've done some of that work too, right? So, and in your experience, what would you recommend?
To change belief systems, therapy is good because it's supervised. You can absolutely do it on your own through journaling, by writing things down and keep asking why, and then ask yourself, is it true? Is it helpful? Is it accurate? Why? Is it true? Is it helpful? Is it accurate? And then what other viewpoints or perspectives could I take? But I often think that you don't need to necessarily change a belief system so much. I think the most therapeutic step is understanding why you do what you do. Or why you feel what you feel. Once you have that insight, it becomes so much more controllable and certain, and then you can work with it and shift it. So I would say therapy for sure. For simplicity's sake, let's go there.
Okay. All right. Great.
Yeah.
Okay. So I have actually, for Brittany, I am told that this is actually something to talk about. Sydney wrote, she said that we talked on the Quilt app a couple of months back and asked for your advice on how to cope with anxiety. And I was nervous about my semester at University of Tampa. I thought you should know that my semester went really well given the circumstances, and really took your advice by saying, maybe that's not true. So see, it's like we impact others. That's awesome. As a follow-up to negative, really take your advice. Maybe that's not true. As a follow-up to negative thoughts to my heart, and helped me a lot. Actually, I need my readers. I love that. As you follow up the original question, I was wondering if you have any advice on dealing with burnout and extreme lack of focus or motivation. So that's, I think that anxiety can definitely drive burnout because we go nonstop, right?
And burnout drives anxiety, just by the way, as well.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. It's a terrible cycle. Any thoughts on that, Brittany? You're more familiar with that conversation than any of us, so
Yeah, and that's so great that she liked that advice or took that. And congratulations to having a great semester. And to go back to that, to give it some context, I guess my advice was, it's the most simple advice that I'd ever gotten. It was very, very early in my mental health journey, and somebody told me that I was in a therapy group with. She said, I said, I keep having these negative thoughts. I mean, they're just like a ticker tape. I can't stop them. And everything that I do is wrong, and everything that I think is wrong. And she said the most simple form of advice was just to, every time you have a negative thought, think, well, maybe that's not true. And she was like, I'm so stupid. I didn't do this. Well, maybe that's not true. I shouldn't have said that. Like, blah, blah, blah. Well, maybe that's not true. And so it started becoming kind of crazy. I thought that I was maybe losing my mind for a couple months because I was going back and forth with like saying a thought and then thinking it's not true. But what it really did was reconfigure and reset my mindset, where I wasn't believing all the thoughts that I had because I didn't know for sure if they were true or not, and kind of separating that belief system that I had with the thought that maybe there was another way of thinking, and to think maybe positively. And now I don't know how this has happened, but I really do have that other side of my voice now, where I usually think positively about a situation before I think negatively about it. And I think that really has to do with the rewiring, which I just continually did. So to not make this go too long with burning out, I mean, this is kind of a two-parter to that. Like, even that explanation seems like after a while you would burn yourself out with the constant thoughts and nagging, and or even just trying to take care of yourself and all the things that we have to do, especially now in quarantine. And I really have to look at my why of why I do things, and set a lot of boundaries, not only for other people, but for myself. And knowing that my worth does not make up what I do and what I achieve and what I accomplish. I can take time for me where I do absolutely nothing, and I can have boundaries around that and not call myself lazy or worthless or all these stories that I'd like to tell myself. And knowing that if I take those 2 hours a day and I know that I'm not going to think negatively about it, then the rest of the day I can run around and do whatever I'd like. And that makes me feel safe. That makes me feel connected. And then when I actually take those 2 hours and I feel better, I know that I kept my promise to myself and I feel better.
Yeah, I mean, look at our society pushes us so hard. And I feel like when I watch the generations behind me, like my nieces and nephews, the amount of anxiety and pressure is unbelievable. So the way you're wired just from a young age, right? And I think, you know, when I think about it, and the things that I've learned is it's a conditioning. The brain is a muscle, like it's a conditioning. So learning these things or unlearning these things takes time and practice. It just doesn't go away. And when you talked about a toolbox before, that's great. It's tools, right? We need tools to help us get through things and think in a different direction.
And so let me just preface
Yeah.
this by saying I am not professional here. I am not the one that should be giving any advice. So please take all of my recommendations with a grain of salt, and please listen to the experts, Stephen and Mitch. I'm signing off.
Right. No, it's okay. That's, you know, it's good. But you know what? Sometimes personal experience is absolutely the best advice. Like when you've lived it, I mean, great. Anything can be academic, but like when you're actually in it, it's like being a parent, right? Like I read all these books about being a mom, and then my kid showed up and forget it. I don't even know what happened, you know? So, but it's academic, but then there's real life. So I have a question here. How can I overcome my own stigma with my mental health? I almost feel ashamed about admitting that I suffer from depression. So this is really, I think it's about, again, it goes back to the perception around mental health, right? Any thoughts on that? Stephen, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like what we've been talking about here is like challenging our perceptions of things, right? Like, again, admitting that you are having these, you know, thoughts or are having these challenges is really the first step in doing that. I think learning, like we all have, I mean, one of the things that always comes back to us at NAMI is how powerful our stories are and how powerful it is to share, even if we don't feel like we're the expert in this, you know, thing. Honestly, nobody is the expert, you know. I mean, I think for all of us, like, one of the things that we always think is like, show me the place that's working. Show me the place where people are fully recovered and everything is fine and we don't really face that. That doesn't exist, right? So we're all kind of learning together. And part of the way that we do that is figuring out what works for each of us, and then kind of taking the next step and then helping the next person up who's saying, oh, I'm feeling a little bit like I'm not sure, you know, how can we help shorten that bridge? And sometimes we talk about the Grand Canyon in between where you feel like you need help and where you actually start to ask for help. And so anything we can do to just build that little bridge. And for those of us who maybe started to talk about it a little bit more or been brave enough to share a letter or talk about their story, I think like these are places where you can then look for support for people who maybe have gone through what you've gone through. Go on to, you know, the NAMI website and find your local NAMI and see if there's a support group that you could just go and start to talk about these things. YouTube is a great resource of people who are sharing stories, like Mitch said, where it just, you know, it could reach out and maybe be an aha moment for you. So the support's out there, and admitting that you're ready to start accepting some of it or thinking about it well, welcome to the family, because we're happy to have you, and there's tons of support out here for
Right. And what I'm hearing from all of you is people need to know they're not alone.
you. Yes.
Like, you are not alone. You are not, and I mean this in a good way, you're not unique. There's somebody who has been through what you're going through. And just reaching out is just a beginning, right? And then maybe having a different perception of the stigma starts to unfold, right? Mitch.
I'm very passionate about this one. I have to jump in. So
Please.
I think that shame is the core seed of like so much suffering, period, right? And when we talk about internal stigma, that's essentially what it is. It's a layer of shame that there's something wrong with you, inherently wrong. The two biggest medicines that has helped me with shame and stigma, one is the moment that I saw someone who I would consider to be a normal person going through the exact same thing that I was and thriving despite it, I was like, oh, shame's gone. Like, period. We know that awareness campaigns don't do anything. I think awareness, like anyone who has good intent to do stuff for mental health, I take my hat off for. But holding signs up saying it ain't weak to speak just does not move the dial. The only thing that changes stigma is behavior change. People role modeling what it's like and telling stories and living despite illness. When people see that in action, that's belief. That's not hope, that's belief. So the first thing is, if you have any type of shame, there is absolutely no need. You just need to find someone that's gone through what you've been through and see that it exists, and it will be gone in a second. And part of what Heart on My Sleeve does is we're trying to create as many archetypes as possible so that someone will have someone to relate to. The second thing is that this is a book called the DSM. This is the Diagnostics and Statistics Manual. It's what psychologists use to go through and say you have panic disorder 7.15, blah, blah, blah. So I know this book up back to front. There is not a single word, there is not a single symptom in this book that's not experienced by every single person in the world on a weekly to monthly basis.
Makes sense.
The only difference between someone who's quote unquote diagnosable and quote unquote not, first of all, is nothing. But if you really had to push it, it's two variables, intensity and duration. It's not, do I have anxiety or depression or am I manic? It's how much and for how long. It's physically impossible to remove an emotion from the human body, nor is it necessary. We don't need to get rid of this stuff. We simply need to realize, to me, mental illness is the excess occurrence of naturally occurring emotions. We don't need to work out how to remove it or how to make us normal. We are normal by default. It's just snipping off the very top part, because it's the excess in intensity and duration that's doing the damage, not the presence of it, just the top end. So being 10 out of 10 anxious for 2 months, not sustainable, beyond our point of coping. Being anxious at a 6 out of 10 for a week, that's just part of being a human being. We're all manic. We all even hallucinate from time to time. It's just how much and for how long, and getting back into the curve in which you can cope. Mental health isn't about being happy all the time. It's about good coping. That's my rant done.
No, it's great. I mean, really, you're talking about like kind of living life on life's term and living the mind on the mind's terms, right? So, I mean, that's true. I cannot.
It's just being human. There's no shame in being human.
Right. Okay, I have another question here. Would anyone, and if anyone feels qualified to answer this, and if, how do you suggest we explain that for some of us, medication along with therapy and mindfulness for mental illness is imperative and is not an easy way out? Do any of you feel qualified to answer that?
Can you say it one more time? So it's for...
Sure. How would you suggest we explain that for some of us, medication along with therapy and mindfulness for mental illness is imperative and is not an easy way out? So basically, I think they're asking, how to explain to others that they actually need to be on this medication. It's not just a Band-Aid.
Right. Yeah. I think like everybody's different and every body is different, right? And that's why we need each other. And that's why we need to hear each other's stories of what works for one person and what doesn't, and what work did you do through therapy or through medication, through meditation. I mean, like Mitch is saying, it's really, there's a lot of things about what is the excess part of this and how did you work through your journey with that? And that looks so different for so many people. And that's why it's so hard to say this is specifically kind of the answer for any one person. I think, like ending the stigma for mental illness and starting to talk about it, it's also ending the stigma on treatment and being able to reach out to your doctor, your therapist, your friend, another family member, folks who've gone through this, through things like September letters and through Mitch's organization of like, this is what it looked like for me. And that we have to respect everybody's journey in that. I don't think there's an easy way out for anybody. I think it's just what worked for you.
I'm on medication.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm on an antidepressant. I started 4 years ago. Probably should have started 14 years ago. I think for me, medication is like putting a backboard on a basketball hoop. You still have to shoot the shot. The ball's got to get into the hoop. It just means that if you're slightly off, it still goes in. Another analogy is, before, there would be a thought that stuck to my glass wall in my mind. No matter what I did, that would stick and ruminate, and I would collapse into it. Medication is like my Windex. It's just like, I can get rid of it easier. I still have to do all the work, but I can get rid of it easier. So for me, I'm not a medical doctor, but I believe that the way I view mental health medication is getting to par. If you're a diabetic, you would have no stigma against insulin. It's not making you stronger or better. It's getting you to where everyone else is. For me, I just wanted a level playing field. I still have to do the work. It's not an excuse for the work. It actually allows me to get heavier and deeper into the work that I otherwise would have avoided because it's just too heavy to lift.
Yeah, that's great. And when you talk about like the diabetes analogy, I mean, if you had any other illness, you wouldn't have to justify the medication for it. There are mental illnesses that 100%, it's not an option to be off medication. And I have friends who suffer from those mental illness, whether it's bipolar or whatever. And I've lost friends who are bipolar because they went off their medication and took their own lives. So, if somebody had cancer, if they had diabetes, nobody would ever question why you're on that medication. And I think anybody who needs to be on medication, you just come from a spot of like, this is just not an option. Excuse me.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I think like many medications, if you let yourself go, as many of us have, until you're very, very ill, we would see somebody who's been off of, like, if they have diabetes for a long time off of medication and needing that support, really struggling, and think, well, of course, because you needed some help here that you didn't get. And so I think we don't, for some reason, again, and we were talking about this a little before, I think mental illness is one of those things that folks, because we don't 100% know all the answers, we're a little nervous to talk about it. And I think sometimes that even comes in when we're thinking about somebody who's maybe really in a place where they're struggling or they're having a crisis, of not thinking about it in those terms, and thinking like, it's just gotten so far. But that would happen for any illness, right? That would happen for any illness. And we would expect that you would need some support, whether that's, again, care, therapy, or medication. And that shouldn't be something that we stigmatize. We certainly wouldn't tell somebody to power through diabetes. I mean, that wouldn't make sense, right? So, it's a tool.
Or that they're weak, or they,
Right.
they don't have good self-control, whatever. We wouldn't tell people that, right? And it has to come from that same position.
Right.
No question. Okay, I have another one. I've basically been depressed since 2010, and only this year I accepted it and searched for help. I was doing okay in using September letters. That's great. Ever since it launched, to find relief, and I was doing okay until last week, when I had to push my dad away because he only added to my stress and depression. But I feel bad for putting myself first. Any tips or advice on how to find peace in this and not go through this feeling bad every day? So basically, somebody is putting themselves and their needs first. Mitch, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think boundaries is super important. Boundaries should be like a compulsory subject in primary school, high school, and university, or just psychology in general. But I think we grow up thinking that saying what we need is wrong. Saying what we need is guilt-ridden. I would say one of the greatest things I've done for my own mental health is learn how to communicate my needs and protect myself. Learn how to interact with people in a way that's sustainable. As Brene Brown says it best, like, here's what's okay, here's what's not okay. It's very simple when you put it in those terms. And I would try and override your brain's need for certainty, which will trump everything, to think in black and white. My dad can either be in my life or I can have mental health. If you're faced with that decision, that's very hard and almost unanswerable. You don't need to answer that. Don't let your brain think in that way. There's gray. Maybe I need to modulate my involvement with my father a little bit in terms of frequency and duration. And we need to find our holding pattern, and maybe some hard but real conversations of confident honesty need to happen in order to sustain this. But try not to either run away from it or aggressively make someone wrong. It's this middle zone of integrating needs and listening and compromising that will end up being the most healthy way forward, I believe.
Great answer. And either one of you want to answer that question, Stephen or Brittany? Have any experience with that? Having to draw a boundary?
So much experience. Boundaries are probably the hardest thing for me in terms of growing up as a kid actor, as a people pleaser, as a performer, having to be happy and on, and everybody needs to like me, and I find that to be really hard with my family. And I think a lot of people, especially now with the holidays, really feel like you have to be on, you have to be a certain thing. Everybody has to, put on a brave face and show grandma that you're doing well, even though you are really sad, and it's hard because those are exhausting things to do. Sometimes, I have to do a whole self-talk before I get on the phone with my parents. And I say a mantra. It's like a very not spiritual mantra, very nice, but I say to myself, I am allowed to be seen as a bad daughter. I am allowed to be seen as a bad daughter. And that doesn't mean that they don't love me, and that doesn't mean that I don't love them, but whatever their idea is about me, or whatever my idea that I think that I want them, to see me as, it might not necessarily be true. And I know from experience, and I know through, therapy, the more work I do on myself, the more work goes into our relationship, and the healthier they become through some sort of osmosis or something. Our connection really does change when I put myself forward first.
Yeah, that's great. Stephen, you looked like you wanted to hop in as well.
Well, I think it's I just feel like these stories and perspectives are so amazing to hear. And I think the thing that I would just put out there too is that NAMI, part of the thing that NAMI offers is also family classes, right? So for many of us, whether we're the person who's kind of living with a mental illness and trying to work through it ourselves, there's also our family who wants to be supported in many cases, but just really doesn't know how. Mm-hmm. So that's where NAMI came from, is all of us working together to sort of figure this out. And what we've done over time, over the 40 years NAMI's been around trying to work on this issue, is really thinking about what are the things we need to learn. And so there are classes that are free, and they're offered all across the nation. And so if you reach out to your local NAMI, you could sign up, your parents could sign up, and also they can get some tips, because it's also sometimes hard as the family member to know, what do we need to care for ourselves, to care for our loved one. And then for those of us living with a mental illness, it's also sometimes hard to express that to our family members and figure out how we can ask for help in a good way too. So there's lots of organizations out there. NAMI's certainly not the only one that does it, but there are folks willing to help on both sides.
Yeah, no, it's great. So, okay, so we're getting in towards the end of the hour, and so we're going to start wrapping this up. You guys have all been great. Before we go, and before I kind of give a synopsis of what I've heard tonight, if you could each give 2 to 3 things that people could walk away from this call with, if they're feeling isolated, if they're feeling stressed, if they're feeling alone and afraid right now. And again, we could all agree it's been a crazy year, right? For so many reasons. And what would be the 3 things you would tell them to do? There's a good one, right? 3 tools, 3 books or a book or something, you know, what would you tell? I mean, obviously, you know, September Letters is great, and Heart on My Sleeve is great, and the organizations are great. But if you personally were to tell someone, give them 2 to 3 things to do walking away from this, you think would help them or not be afraid of or whatever, what would they be?
I guess I will start. I think the one thing that I'll say is right before this call, it just so happens that I ended up kind of accidentally reading an article about, not to bring the mood very, very down, but about a kid who recently just killed himself, and just because of the pandemic and feeling isolated and feeling alone. And I was reading the article and reading about what his father was saying, and reading about what, you know, the boy had written, and just feeling hopeless and feeling really isolated and feeling alone. And I think my biggest takeaway, you know, and of course feeling so, you know, distraught by it, is that I think if we all collectively realize that we all feel alone sometimes, we all feel hopeless, and we all feel like we're the only ones that are going through this particular thing. And if we just reach out and realize that the next person probably that you think has it all figured out is going through something very similar, if not the same thing, and knowing and having the bravery and just the inner knowing and trusting your gut that someone will be there to catch you. Someone will be able to tell you, yes, me too. Whether that's online, whether that's through September Letters, or, you know, any NAMI, like anywhere you want to go, there's so many outlets and so many places to get support and connection. And I think that just try to find that connection, because it's out there and it's waiting for you.
Okay, great. What about you, Stephen?
Oh, I mean, I totally agree with everything Brittany just said. Like, the army of concerns and feelings that we all face as we kind of think about our first steps into doing this, there's also an army of folks out here who would do anything to help, and are just hoping that you'll take the chance on opening up and asking for it. And so Heart on My Sleeve, September Letters, NAMI, there's a literal army of us out here. And so I would say, if you're feeling alone, you are not alone. Like, look at the bravery just in the chat alone of people who are reaching out and thinking about taking that step. That gap that we talked about earlier between when somebody feels like they might need help and when they actually get it, I have personally not met anybody who says, I wish I did it, you know, like, I wish I would have done it earlier. I haven't met anybody who didn't wish they had started the journey earlier. So it's never too early to start talking about it. There's nothing wrong with you. Like, it's okay to ask for help. We're here for you. Yeah, I guess that's what I would say about it. You're loved, and you're very loved.
Right. That's true. And Mitch?
Oh my goodness. Can I give you like 30,000 words takeaway? No, I'll give you
Easily
3 things.
probably could. I only have so much time right today, though.
This is tough. I would say the first thing is understand why you think you don't deserve healing, or that you don't deserve happiness, or get curious as to what the barrier is. And most of the time it'll be a fear of confronting something that you'd rather not. And I will say from experience that the only way round is through, and that it is very much worth short-term pain. And if you compare the physical body cannot, well, very rarely heals without pain. And I understand why people don't do the mental health work, because if you've dislocated your shoulder, it's probably going to hurt a lot. If you're already in pain, the last thing you want to do is put that back in place. So what you do is you get really good at creatively playing tennis like this, and grabbing the Cocoa Pops from the shelf like this, and you go your whole life like that. And I think the same is true with mental health. You dislocate your mental health shoulder, things fracture along the course of life, and you're already in pain. So you're like, I want to avoid healing as much as possible because that's going to hurt too. But the hurt is worth it. And it's short term to get a whole range of functionality back. So have the courage to be real is the first thing. Second thing is get clear on what the destination is. Mental health isn't about being happy all the time. It's not about removing these things from your life. It's about coping well with life's problems, choosing to respond in different ways, and being able to experience moments of connection and joy and fulfillment and purpose and meaning way more than it is constant euphoria. It's a far more attainable goal than you think. And the third thing would be connection is shown to be the single greatest protective factor to mental health, supportive relationships, because the same problem can become less impactful just by connecting over it or talking through it. So I think get curious around your attachment style. Ask your therapist potentially to work with you on what is your attachment style, and that will help you build more meaningful relationships, deeper connections that will sustain no matter the adversity that comes up.
Those are great suggestions, all of you. I just adore all of you. I mean, this has been a great conversation, and I appreciate your vulnerability. So let's just say when we look at 2020, I think reset was a great word, Brittany. I mean, when you said it was like people were forced to have a reset. So we look at that and we look at exactly what we all talked about, connecting with others, walking through the work that we have to do, being okay with maybe having mental illness. I mean, it's just being okay that, you know, this is something we need to address. Again, if you were sick with anything else, it would be okay, right? So knowing that in order for us to be better, it's an acceptance, and we have to be okay with talking about it. You know, and what you brought in there too, Mitch, talking about how shame around so much, it creates such a dissonance in the brain, right? It's the, you know, we hide, we don't heal. You know, again, I just go back to, you know, when you shared so openly about being a child and being diagnosed with something. And again, if you were diagnosed with something else, people would have been all over you, but instead you felt like you had to go inward and not show it to anyone. I mean, the damage that does. So, you know, we can identify and know that we're not alone. There's a lot of organizations out there for support and reaching out. And I know personally from personal experience too, that when I get in my own head and I'm convinced nobody wants to talk to me, I mean, people would rather me pick up the phone than do something stupid. And that's the truth, right? So, you know, and again, you know, so we're creating authentic connections. We're looking to 2021 to make a shift and think about things differently and be open. And, you know, it's our job to be human and our job to connect, right? And share love and go forward. You know, this, just for the audience, just so you know, there will be resources posted on the Visionary Collective's website. All of these organizations will be up. And there will also, this will be posted on this actual panel will be posted on the Visionary Collective within the next 2 days. So as soon as I get it back, I'll be posting it. So if you want to go back and listen to parts of it, feel free. And, you know, again, I just want to thank all of you for being here. And I want to thank Eileen King, my executive producer, and Alana Saab, our little marketing guru. Thank you so much for helping pull this together. And again, I really appreciate the vulnerability of the audience. Keep being that vulnerable, keep showing that, you know, we're human and we all need help. This is a particularly hard time. I mean, mental health is always important, but this is a particularly tough time, and we need to shift into this next year with a lot of hope and love. So thank you all for being here. And I look forward to maybe connecting with you all again.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks all.
Thank you.